Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the About Intelligence podcast on Frankie's Podcast Network. I'm Haleigh Overseth here with our host, Murray Angel, and we have our guest, Aldwyn Altuney, joining us for another episode here on Frankie's Podcast Network. We're so excited. I'm going to toss it over to Murray to give Aldwyn a proper introduction.
Thank you, Haleigh. Pleasure to be here with you, like always. And Aldwyn, welcome to our guests today. Allow me to take this precious moment in now of time to reserve space to introduce the radiant Aldwyn Altuney, affectionately known as the Media Queen, a luminous force who's been brightening the media landscape for over 4 decades with her infectious passion for truth, uplifting stories, and our beloved animal friends. This Sydney-born Gold Coast-based dynamo doesn't just report the news. She creates movements that matter, that resonate with everyone. Founding Animal Action Day and Global Good News Day together because she believes in flooding the world with positivity, love, and hope to lift spirits and save lives. When she's not hosting for her incredible shows, running around for everyone else, or building her empire, AA Expose Media, or just training future Mavens worldwide, you'll find this multi-talented Wonder Woman strumming her ukulele, catching waves. As one part of the beautiful and infectious Fiddly Gigglers comedy duo, she's here today proving that someone who's dedicated to their passion, to their life, and to sharing good news is embodiment. And through embodiment comes joy and preservation. So today we are joined by none other than the intelligence herself, Aldwyn Altuney. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Haleigh. What an amazing introduction. Gosh, was that all about me? Was it all that? Wow. It's extraordinary. So this is what happens when you don't have, you're never married and don't have kids by the age of 51. This is what happens. You become a bit of a workaholic and very, dedicated to changing the world in many ways. And yeah, it's extraordinary, the life I've had till now. I'm very, very grateful.
We're so excited to have you here. So I did want to dive into our conversation a little bit. We had talked a little bit before we started the podcast here on emotional intelligence in media and in particularly the social media spaces where we find ourselves today. And I'd love to kind of get some of your insights and maybe some of your takes on how you've maybe had to develop some different kinds of emotional intelligence through the different mediums that have evolved as you've been doing media. Obviously social media is what we're all familiar with and navigating currently, right? But as you've kind of gone through the different spaces of media and the different sort of evolutions of media, like what are really some of the emotional intelligence things that you've had to sort of maybe DIY learn or navigate for yourself?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And I love this topic. And actually on one of my shows, Total Truth Show, we actually did a whole episode on the truth about emotional intelligence. So we've deep dived into this topic with my co-host, Ken Kleinberg. And I love this because I think it's absolutely crucial, not just for business, but for life, in all areas of life, to have emotional intelligence. And I was actually just looking up the meaning of emotional intelligence, and it actually says online it's the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and build stronger relationships. It encompasses the capacity to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others, which is interesting because, there's a lot of personal development I've done over the years, which has led to my emotional intelligence. Now, if I hadn't done the work that I've done for really the last 20 years, I've been deep diving into a lot of different courses, into business, into personal development courses. One of the first ones I did was Landmark Education, and that was in 2006. So nearly 20 years ago, I did that course, and that was absolutely mind-blowing for me in that it helped me see the blind spots in my life, the things that I didn't realize were holding me back. And we all have blind spots in different ways. And the minute
Mhm.
you're conscious to what your blind spot is, the minute you can actually move through it. And often, for a lot of people that they're often stuck around around these feelings of, I don't belong, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, those kind of things. And usually something happens up till the age of 7 where we've been, some kind of trauma has happened or something has happened and it's landed as trauma for us. And I remember being in Landmark, and on the Sunday of the Landmark Forum, there's a 3-day course, one night, and they have this 3-month follow-up course. But the intensive weekend of the Landmark Forum, on the Sunday of the forum, they said, something happens in life and you make it mean something. Something happens, you make it mean something. And then they said up to the age of 7, generally something has happened in your life and you've made it mean something, and it's helped and it's actually shaped the way you do life. It's shaped how you show up in life, right? So for some people, they show up as ambitious or as funny or as, as shy, and these are all ways that people take on being in life to survive life, right? And often it stems from some kind of trauma up to the age of 7. And there I was sitting in the course thinking, gosh, I wonder what happened up to the age of 7 where where something happened that I made it mean something, and then for the rest of my life I've operated because of this in some way. And what came to me was this situation when I was 6 years of age, and I remember befriending this sheep in Turkey that was at my grandma's place, and I was so, I love this sheep, and I was so excited when we were taking the sheep out for a walk one day. And then suddenly, suddenly the 3 guys came and they basically grabbed the sheep from me, cut the sheep's throat in front of me. It was absolutely traumatic. And I remember just running away from everyone, screaming my head off and crying my eyes out. And I sat on the end of the curb as a 6-year-old in Turkey and bawled my eyes out and felt in that moment when that sheep got slaughtered, I felt that a part of me got slaughtered. And what I made that mean is that I can't trust men, right? There were 3 men that killed the sheep. I can't trust men. I can't trust my dad because my dad was holding me back from, rescuing the sheep. I can't trust myself because I clearly wasn't good enough or, able to actually not able to save the sheep's life. So I also felt really bad myself that I wasn't able to save the sheep. And I felt I was very shut down from that moment. And really my innocence died at age 6, but also because I hated my dad and I wasn't conscious of hating my dad, what happened is everything Dad said to me moving forward, I'd rebel against everything Dad said. And my dad's a very strict European, my parents were born in Turkey as Christians in a Muslim country. So they had a hell of a time growing up as Christians in a Muslim country. And I also have Greek and Ukrainian background. So in my heritage, I have people who were killed for stepping up because I had great-grandparents who were kulaks in Ukraine and got killed by Stalin's men. And then my dad's dad ran away to Turkey because he was going to now get killed for speaking up against the government. So we have family members killed for stepping up and speaking up. There I was a 6-year-old. I didn't know any of this it's all in DNA, right? We have 14 generations of DNA in us. And I didn't know any of this as a 6-year-old, but all I knew is that I connected with that sheep. I connected with animals. I always loved animals, right? I would be fascinated by animals. I would sit and watch spiders weave their webs outside my window in Sydney. And I used to be fascinated by these spiders weaving webs and I'd be fascinated by snails and like all kinds of animals. I was just always fascinated by animals. And interestingly, with the sheep incident that happened, my brother was 2 years older than me, and he didn't react at all to this. Because he didn't connect with the sheep. Now, my whole family were there, and they were having a great time because the first time my parents had gone back to Turkey since they migrated to Australia, it took 10 years before they were able to see their family in Turkey, who they left to start a new life in Sydney in 1970. And, they were having a great time, whatever. And for them, it was a very normal thing to see sheep killed in this way. But what they didn't get was the connection that I had with this particular sheep. So for me, it was absolutely traumatic. And then hating my dad, I rebelled against everything my dad said. He was a very strict European man. He'd say, if you live in my house, you live by my rules. And, I was doing things like running away from home, doing drugs and drinking and all that stuff, like just really completely rebellious. And eventually got to the point where, you know, at 15 years of age, he said, "You're not my daughter anymore." And I came home one night at, 5 a.m. after a Halloween party. And one of his rules was you're not allowed to sleep at anyone else's house. And even though I hadn't slept at my friend's place after this party, I had been out all night. And that was the final straw for Dad after continually, doing the opposite of what he was asking me to do. He kicked me out of home at 15, and we had a very strained relationship for many years. However, in the Landmark Forum, on that Sunday of the Landmark Forum, I actually phoned my dad because I realized from that moment I hated my dad, and we had never discussed that situation with the sheep, which actually what was happening there is because family come from a long way away. It was actually a Turkish or a Greek Orthodox tradition that when family come from a long way away, they sacrifice the sheep and they feed the meat to the poor village people. It was actually a very sort of noble thing that was happening. And it comes from the story of Job in the Bible where, Job wanted to sacrifice his son for God and God said, no, sacrifice a sheep. So it's actually very, intrinsically deep in spirituality or in religion as well with this particular practice. However, as a 6-year-old, even if they'd explained that to me, I wouldn't have got it and I'd still be wanting to save that sheep's life. I would not have understood. So on Sunday of the forum, I actually called my dad and I had a straight conversation with him, and this is all linking to emotional intelligence. I had a straight conversation with him and I said, Dad, I have hated you ever since that happened when I was a 6-year-old. And for the first time in all that time, this is now 30 years on. I was 6 years of age when it happened. I'm now 36 sitting in the Landmark Forum. 30 years later, I had a conversation with my dad about that thing that I had blocked out of my memory. It was so traumatic for me that I couldn't even remember that it had happened. But actually getting conscious to it, I said, Dad, I've hated you ever since that happened. And for the first time, he said to me, Aldwyn, darling, he said, I'm so sorry. He said, I'm so sorry that
Misunderstanding.
I had no idea that you would react that way. This is just how, this is what we did back. It was a very normal thing for us, but I had no idea you would respond that way. And in that moment, I got my dad back. And now we have the most extraordinary relationship. My dad is now 87. My mum's 81. They've been together 55 years and we are so close. He lives in Bribie Island. I'm at the Gold Coast. We see each other all the time. We're talking every day or every second day we're on the phone and we have the best relationship now. And that took emotional intelligence. It took actually getting conscious firstly to where the blockage was to actually be able to move through that, to now have the emotional intelligence to be able to speak with my dad openly and honestly, and for him to speak openly and honestly with me and to actually be able to resolve something that I wasn't even conscious of until I got conscious to it in that particular course, that we were able to then move through that blockage that we didn't know was there. So that's just one example of emotional intelligence comes from a knowing, I guess, a knowing and a consciousness of what might be blocking the emotional intelligence.
That's a great answer. Yeah, go ahead, Haleigh. Surely you've got something to that.
Say, it's interesting because you weren't conscious of this experience you had and how traumatic it was for you because you'd blocked it out as a sort of protective measure, which is something that many of us do. Like we all have something that was so difficult and traumatic, but it was also unconscious for your dad. He was just doing what he thought was normal and had no idea about the effect it had on you. So there's like different levels of awareness and consciousness that have to happen from both directions in order for that resolution and communication and that, being able to have now a relationship to happen and to unfold. And it's interesting because I think it speaks to the emotional intelligence that's required again for like on all sides, anything that has happened to you or anything that you think of that this person did that to me or this person, whatever it was, whether it is that deep childhood trauma or something that you've experienced in life that has just stuck with you. There's a certain amount of perspective you can gain from remembering that person might not have realized it affected me that way, right? They might have no idea that that's how I experienced that situation or that circumstance. And maybe to some degree that helps us to sort of let go of that in a way with people that we can sort of detach from those difficult emotions because you don't always necessarily have the opportunity to have that conversation with someone, right? You might be something from an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend, someone that you don't speak to anymore, someone that if you tried to approach them to resolve it wouldn't be interested, or, maybe that person's no longer here. right? So you might not have the opportunity to have that, but it speaks to, I think, where as a society we have gotten to a space where we're at least cognizant of the fact that our actions affect other people, and admitting that we are affected in ways that maybe we don't always give ourselves time to pause and process that energy, right? Marie Angel, I know that processing energy is one of the topics you're best at, so I'll toss it back over to you on that one.
Yeah, really cracked the can open here. We have, like, just straight out of the bat, and really getting the questions and the answers and the conversation to the forefront. So just to really build on top of that for both of you here, like what's really fundamentally coming up to me when I listen to you, Aldwyn, and then the reverberation back from Miss Overseth is miss and lack. And when you put them together, we identified that through the emotional compensation spectrum of miscommunication and lack of communication. But really, fundamentally, what we're discovering here is there's different volumes and levels of consciousness and how we perceive and perspect that. And when our perspective isn't met through perception, there is a dissonance that actually can occur. And if that's stored energetically, emotion being in process all the time, we find ourselves fundamentally taking this on and ingraining it into what we call our personality. And this actually has so much effect because, as you said, people carry this from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And Dr. Joe Dispenza is an incredible source of light who shares very diligently on this particular pathway of the neural plasticity of how we store memories from moments and how they coincide and create influxes in how we show up. And that's our persona, our energy being expressed. And we call that projection as well at a level in this experience. But it's very, very fascinating how emotional intelligence, being energy in motion, is really just the fundamental of understanding that energy is always in motion, and the intelligence is observing that in real time with a level of acceptance, procession, and perception without having a fear of attachment, conservative, or judgment towards it. And you are so right, Aldwyn. Just having that space now, looping back 20 plus years, you can only feel how fundamental that is. And I'm sure anybody who feels what I'm saying through what you've said today is going to deeply resonate, whether they've had a 4-year split from a family member, a lifelong misery of losing your father or your mum early. We all are still connected at some point. We've just discovered that. So to clear up that clarity of perception and misperceivedness, it's really just does come back to being by ourselves and being in the moment, and really just anchoring into that moment with a level of trust, as you've really demonstrated there, because you were in the middle of an event and you've just gone, hey, this is where I am and I'm in the present now and I'm feeling this, so I'm going to acknowledge it. And what a fundamental moment that's occurred from that for you and your father. So thank you for sharing, and absolutely, what an awesome answer. What an awesome answer.
Thank you. And, it's interesting now because I look back at that, and, now I've done, 18 annual animal action events. For years I saw animal cruelty and was upset by it and angered by it. And eventually I took action, which is another thing I think with emotional intelligence, actually taking action. I think it really helps with this whole process of, being able to communicate effectively and to be able to express your emotions and do it in a positive way, because the animal action events weren't about invoking a whole lot of anger and frustration. It was about helping people. The 3 things we stood for with animal action events was awareness, appreciation, respect for animals. And when we have an awareness, appreciation, respect for animals, we actually have that for ourselves as well, because we are all interconnected. And now I look back at that sheep from all those years ago, and I'm so grateful for the sacrifice that sheep was. It's a very, coming back to the family, I remember after crying so much, and everyone had these little blood crosses from the sheep on their forehead, and that's something they did. It was part of the ceremonial. They killed the sheep and they put some of the blood of the sheep as a cross on the forehead as a protection.
To say thank you. Oh, protection. Okay.
For protection. For pretend as a blessing. It was like protection and a blessing. They put this blood cross. I mean, it's a very religious practice, I guess, religious being ceremonial, and we all have different beliefs. And it's also a matter, I think, of just respecting wherever people are at, because Dad certainly didn't mean to hurt me in any way. That would be the last thing he would have wanted. But it was just that my emotions connected with that sheep. Like every morning as a 6-year-old, I remember this big sheep in the basement of my grandma's house. And every morning I'd run down, I'd cuddle the sheep and I'd connect with the sheep. But he never saw any of that, right? he didn't see that connection I have with the sheep. And interestingly, we are continually challenged through life. Like, literally last week, I had some people at my house that dug up a whole lot of my fruit trees and vegetables thinking that they were weeds. Now, I got quite angry about that. Now, it takes a lot for me to get angry and to even express my anger without hurting anyone. But I actually got very angry because I had a connection with those fruit trees that I've been growing for 3 years, some of them, that they thought were weeds and dug up without asking me. Right. And, as the owner of the house, I felt completely disrespected. I felt completely,
boundaries.
brutalized in many ways. I felt like these are my babies. You've just massacred my babies. All these vegetables and fruit trees that were in amongst the weeds. And yes, it did need weeding, but that brought up a whole lot of triggers for me. That the fact that this happened, because clearly once they're dead, they're dead. I mean, these are trees, but this happens with children. It happens with animals. It happens, it happens in all sorts of unexpected ways in life, because life throws curveballs, and this is where emotional intelligence is so important. And also, being able to express your anger. We had a detailed conversation about this, Murray, being able to express your anger without hurting anyone, because my dad always said anger is danger. Anger is danger. And I internalized my anger for many years. I was very self-destructive, smoking a lot, drinking a lot, not wanting to be here, feeling invisible for many years as a kid. I felt very invisible. I felt very much like the outcast. I felt very much like I did not belong in this world, and I didn't want to be in this world because I was watching a lot of negative news with my dad. I was seeing evidence of bullying, of animal cruelty, all that sort of thing for many years. And I thought, why would you even want to be in this world when everything's so nasty and negative? And that was the filter I had, because like the yin yang of life, all I could see was the darkness. I saw the darkness on the outside. I saw the darkness on the inside. I internalized. I was so self-destructive. And, it took a lot of work for me, a lot of personal development work, investing over $1 million in my business and personal development to this point for 20 years. And I keep investing because it's an ongoing journey and process, and I'm certainly not perfect. And you don't need to invest $1 million in your business and personal development. I went a little bit extreme with it. You definitely don't need to do that. But I've done I've done all the neuroscience work. I've done hypnosis. I've done NLP. I've done past life regression. I've done, like EFT. I've done just about every modality you can imagine.
You love to play.
Try out all of them.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been invaluable, and I'm an absolute sponge for knowledge. Sponge for knowledge. I think it's really important with emotional intelligence to have insight into how we do life and what is it that's empowering us and what is disempowering us in life. And often the disempowering things are often relate to relationships. Okay, now 95% of your happiness or misery is with relationships. Now it takes two to tango. Now, Haleigh, I love how you mentioned about my dad also had a certain level of emotional intelligence to be able to apologize in that moment. And in that one apology, one conversation, we were able to resolve that. Now, for those who have loved ones that have passed away, and they might have some guilt or some shame about what's happened or some anger, the ways you can release it is you can write it out, whatever you want to say to that person. And then I suggest just burn it, right? Burn it under a candle, do a ceremonial burning under the full moon or whatever. Burn it, let it go, and move on with your life, because it's like resentment. It's like wanting someone else dead, but you're taking the poison with resentment. So you don't want to have resentment for anyone, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And the minute we get conscious, we can shift it, we can transform it, and we can move on, and we'll be much lighter for the experience. We'll be much more empowered, and we will have much more peace, which is in the scale of consciousness with Dr. Hawkins' scale of consciousness. Peace is at 600 hertz. When you have shame or guilt, you're at 20, 30 hertz. Okay, so we want to be moving from fear, which is at 100 hertz, any sort of fear. Anger is at 150 hertz, where we're vibrating at. We want to bring it up to love and above. Love, joy, gratitude, peace, enlightenment. That is where we want to hang out most of the time. And when we go down to these lower states of being and consciousness, at times we're going to get challenged, and that's perfectly okay as well, because that's the human experience of going up and down this scale. The minute we're feeling crap, acknowledge it, let it out, however that works, without hurting anyone, and ideally without hurting yourself either, and move through. We get the learning, we can then move and expand our consciousness again and live a greater experience of life.
Very refreshing.
I appreciate that you mentioned like the anger and the sort of like what we call the lower vibrational frequencies, but I think it's also important for us to kind of have the conversation about being unconditional about those frequencies, right? And There's, as humans, we have this tendency to give a hierarchical structure to these things, as if like the, you know, yes, you want it, the love and above, right? Like that's what feels good. That's why you want to be there. But it's not the only part of the experience that we have. And so we do need to be able to have enough emotional intelligence as a species, as a collective, to be able to hold space, love and above space, for those negative emotions when people are experiencing those states, right? Because I think that is a difficulty of when that anger becomes dangerous, whether it's to others, to the outside, or to yourself. And I've experienced that too. You and I have that in common. Like the very sort of cannibalistic voice inside that can like be the most evil thing that is said to you is that internal voice, right? But that's where it comes to the expression of those things and being able to openly express those things, having a place to be able to do that. And it's important that we allow for those things with one another, right? Like to be able to be emotionally intelligent enough to recognize, okay, if someone is in a state of anger, we don't necessarily need to then drop ourselves to that emotional state of fear about it. Hold that frequency of that love and above while they're experiencing it so that they have a safe space to express that, right? And I think that's something we're getting better at as a society, as a collective, but certainly we do still have, you know, steps to take, and we do have to kind of work further towards having the sort of wherewithal, right, to be able to hold those higher frequencies when someone is in a lower state, rather than dropping into a further lower state than them, going into a fear, going into a judgment aspect of it, right? And that unconditionality, you know, again, that's a topic we like to talk about quite frequently on our podcast about intelligence and otherwise at Frankie's Podcast Network, because all of it is an experience and it is all valid in our human experience.
Yes,
Yeah, it's so
100%.
amazing. I couldn't
Yes,
agree
Mark.
more. Yeah, no, it's just amazing. Haleigh, you really mirror that back in a unique way, you know, because consciousness is a very, very expansive thing and subject on its own. But when we tie that scale of consciousness that we like to refer to it as into like what we also know as spiral dynamics or spiralytics, it really does show the evolution of just having the human experience and how there has to be a level of unconditionality. Like we were literally just speaking about this prior to actually going live, which I don't usually bring up, but we had a really unique conversation that just landed in our present moment about how flexible this human body is and how we can just reach every single part of the being that needs to be to care for it, and the evolution of how wherever we came from, we're here now and we can touch our toes in one single movement. We can put our hands behind and touch our back. We can care and caress and nurture and be present with ourselves and create awareness through consciousness in that scale for ourselves on an individual, but we can also do that on a collective. That is astronomical to have those two in play in duality at every given moment for every single fractal experiencing that in their own very essence. And when you just truly multiply on that, unconditionality is the only thing that could really work. So I have to fully agree with you that that's why we speak about it so much here, and it comes up time and time again, because these are like fundamentals that fit inside the box, and not to put a box around something because that's not what we're here for. But when you can give a conception that there's something inside something, there's a comfort in that. And I think that's what we're looking for here, is a comfort that there's something we can all agree on consensusly and be aware of and act within, even though we're all having this fractal experience. And love to hear how you think about that too, Aldwyn.
Yes, everyone's at different spaces on their journey, right? And I think a big part of this is to be aware of if we are being judgmental of others, and actually getting that there's actually no right or wrong, that there just is. There just is. And you know, how are you feeling in this, you know, ism? Actually, a friend of mine started something called nowism, right? About now, the present moment, right? There just is the present moment. And the emotions we have in this present moment, they're either going to be empowering us or disempowering us. Now, most people say, well, what do you want in life? Most people say, I just want to be happy. Right? That's what most people say. I just want to be happy. Okay, and that obviously is a elevated emotion. However, as Haleigh said, these depressed and suppressed emotions sometimes are very necessary because they're a reset that needs to happen. And in every sort of challenge, in every breakdown, there's always a breakthrough at the end of every breakdown. For example, what happened in my garden just last week, where the whole yard got ripped up with 10 different plants. Okay, what happened from that is I stopped for a moment after I got over my anger and expressed my anger and expressed very directly without throwing anything
Very directly.
without hurting anybody. I said my piece, right? Whereas in the past, I probably would have not said it quite how I said it. But nowadays I'm getting much better at expressing how I'm feeling. And I think that's really, really important, not to suppress it, actually to let it out, say what you need to say. And then I thought for a moment after I got over my anger, because I don't like feeling angry. It actually upsets my whole body. Like I actually feel crap when I'm angry. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And there I was very conscious in that moment. I was like, I don't want to feel angry. Okay, what's it going to take to shift this? What's the learning? Because I know that everything happens for you, not to you. And I thought, okay, how could we have avoided this situation from happening? Okay, one thing I could have done to avoid it, and as the other two people that were involved that dug up the yard said, they could say, well, you could have labeled the plants. And I thought, yeah, that's a great idea. I could have labeled the plant. I could have labeled the avocado tree. I could have labeled the pawpaw tree. But for me, I was thinking, because I assumed, and as they say, assuming is making an ass of you and me, right? I assumed that people knew what an avocado tree looked like or what a pawpaw tree looked like. And clearly they didn't, because they thought they were weeds, right? And it's actually a really interesting analogy. So one thing I could have done was I could have labeled the plants. The other thing is I could have had very clear boundaries about, please do not dig up the yard without checking in with me first. Okay, so they now know that, right? And I know that they had good intentions. I know they didn't mean to rip up the fruit trees. And I know that, hey, the good news is you can always plant more fruit trees. You can always plant more veggies, which is what we've now done. We've started afresh. And maybe the energy of those last fruit trees, maybe that just needed to go and be blessed and be gone, right? And really in the overall scheme of things, it's really a first world problem. Like I think of people in Iran getting bombed right now and what's going on in the Middle East. And I think this is really a first world problem. Like, what the hell are you whinging about, Aldwyn? So then I have this conversation with myself, right? Like, why is it I got so triggered by that situation? And it's because I had bonded with those plants. I had been nurturing those plants. They were like my babies, right? And so it's that the emotions of how I felt in nurturing and, really looking after these plants, even though, yes, they were in amongst some weeds, it's that felt I felt very disrespected. I felt very much like the work I had done had been for nothing. All those years of work that I put in had been for nothing. You know what I mean? There was all these sort of meanings that I gave to the situation. And the minute that I shifted that and went, okay, the learning is from now on, we label things. From now on, everyone knows not to dig up the yard. And then I was able to come out of that angry situation and I was able to come back to a place of peace. And to express, and then actually go to the two people that I was angry with and apologize about how that I overreacted and that I was very angry, and I apologize, and then explaining this is why I was angry, right, in a calm way. This is why I was angry, because I had connected with those plants, and neither of them saw me connect with those plants like that, right? It's kind of like my dad. My dad didn't see me connect with that sheep for that whole month that I was connecting with that sheep. He never saw any of that. So his perception of that version of reality was very different to my perception of that version of reality, right? And this is where emotional intelligence is so important. And I think being respectful of people's space, if you're living in someone's house and it's not your yard, then just check in with them in future before you go digging up the yard. That just makes sense to me, right? However, maybe something to look at for me is the systems of when I allow people to come into the house, because we rent rooms out here, right? So I have lodgers and people that live here, that maybe make it very clear to them in future in our system to say, we actually have something there that says, if something doesn't belong to you, don't touch it. But maybe actually to be very clear that in the garden, this is what's expected in the garden, for example, right? And you can set some structures and frameworks. They say structure creates freedom. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to necessarily go along with that, but you could at least do your bit to, help to create a certain outcome. And then at the same time, be committed, not attached, because life will throw curveballs. Be committed to the outcome you want. Don't be attached to how that's going to look. Maybe sometimes, it's going to go a different way, and maybe there's learnings in that too.
Well, I think,
Thanks for sharing.
there are a lot of learnings that,
Yeah.
yeah, and I do appreciate you sharing that personal story as well.
Very
I
much.
think that some of
Thank
the
you.
good, though, that comes from it, right? Like if you can kind of reframe a little bit, and this is, I think, something that we need to do with emotional intelligence is to recognize a little bit where, like you said, where the anger comes from and why you had that reaction. And the reason you had that reaction was actually for a very beautiful reason. You connected to these plants emotionally. And that's a thing that I think a lot of us are kind of remembering, as Marie likes to
Mhm.
say, that we have not just this capacity to connect to animals, but to connect to plants, right? To connect to everything around us and in our reality. That we can have that emotional relationship, and that those plants very much probably have the capacity to have that emotional relationship with you, right? And so it's important to remember sometimes, I think, that sometimes the most explosive anger or the most sort of difficult emotions, whether it's depression or whatever it is, they do, even anxiety, it comes from a place of love. It comes
Love.
from a place of
It's true.
your connection. And if you can kind of reframe it that way and kind of help people see that, it's not just the kind of systematic things that you're talking about, but it is something that it might have, you can't know that it wasn't a lesson those people needed to learn, not in being mindful necessarily of you, of your home, but of the concept that, oh, people can become attached to plants the way that they can become attached to people. You can have a
So true.
relationship with nature the way that you have a relationship with a pet or a human, even, right? And even
Yeah.
just that kind of
Yes.
reframing for people, I think, is important.
And even just to
Yes.
add on to that, also, sorry, go ahead, Owen.
Yes. No, go, Murray. Go. Yes.
Just to quickly add on to that, even just reframing the understanding fundamentally of the energy behind the word commitment and what that truly means to us, because to commit to something is an attachment to an outcome, not because you're here on a deficit to bring out the worst or good because everything just is. It is an attachment to an outcome because that's the priority of manifestation. So you're investing your energy into that. So having a disconnection between those words already creates a state of dissonance inside of that. And we must recognize this as a species. We must grow. It's our opportunity. And so I wanted to bring that forward as well. Please, yes.
Yes, that's
Yes,
very,
yes, yes.
very
Keep
interesting. And it is
sharing.
something,
We're on
yeah,
the
it is
frequency
something,
at the moment.
yeah, yeah, so
Without
great. So
intelligence.
Oh, I love it. Loving this conversation. And just firstly, with what Haleigh was saying about connecting with plants, there's a whole lot of scientific evidence of, when you speak lovingly to plants or to people, how it creates a really beautiful,
Resonance.
a resonance.
Harmony.
For anyone who knows Dr. Dr.
Yeah.
Masaru Emoto's water experiment,
Water experiments.
yeah, when Dr. Emoto looked at how water can be affected by human thoughts, words, and emotions, and of course we are 70% water as well, human beings, but also everything's made up of water, right? And he claimed that when water was exposed to positive stimuli like love and gratitude, it formed beautiful symmetrical ice crystals when it was frozen. Whereas when you speak to water in a negative way, if you put hate words or angry words onto the water, this was water in jars that he had these experiments with, and he put all these angry words on some and put loving words on others. And with the angry words, it was really distorted and fragmented ice crystals that would happen. And he used high-speed photography to capture these changes in the water. And it is extraordinary when you look at these images. And just look up Dr. Emoto and look up online. Plants have an energy, animals have an energy, we have an energy, everything has an energy, right? And it's that consciousness, when you're conscious to that connection and how we speak to others and how we speak to ourselves. And often people can be their own worst enemies. The number of times I hear people say, oh, you're such an idiot, or I'm so stupid, or whatever. Notice and catch yourself. Emotional intelligence, being able to catch yourself when you're saying stuff like that to yourself and saying no, thank you for sharing, but you can go now. I love myself. Look yourself in the eyes in the mirror and say, I love you. I am beautiful. I am strong. I am courageous. I am, these I am affirmation statements are really, really powerful. And it is the foundation of having emotional intelligence with others, when we can have love and peace for ourselves, we can have love and peace for others. As they say, hurt people hurt people. And I have been a shocking people pleaser, I would say, for a lot of my life. And look, there's nothing wrong with pleasing people, but when you do it so much that you're actually out of balance, where you're not actually nurturing yourself, then that's not a very healthy way to be, because what will happen is you'll burn out, as I did over many years as a journalist, 20 years as a journalist in mainstream media, 20 years in my own business. It is go, 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 go. And I have had to learn to slow down to speed up. Now, this morning I did yoga, I hopped in the sauna, I make time for meditation, I make time for these things without feeling guilty, because guilty, of course, is the 30 hertz vibration. We don't want to be feeling guilty. We don't want to be feeling shame, ideally, or at least not for too long, because it's not a great experience for your body. It actually causes dis-ease in your body. So yes, they're valid emotions, and I think we need to feel these emotions at times, and we need to get the learnings from these emotions, but then it's a choice of how long you want to stay there. And some people love to live in drama all the bloody time. Some people absolutely love it, and they actually don't know life without drama. And we have been conditioned this way by the mainstream media, by government, by our education system. We've been conditioned to live in drama. Just put Netflix on, and maybe comedies will be like 1/10 of what you see on Netflix will be a comedy, right?
That's such a what an example. A great example.
It's true. And this is something that we were talking about too a little bit. Again, the element of comedy, you do the Fiddly Gigglers comedy duo. And for me, comedy is such a beautiful way to transmute energy that are in those lower spheres, a beautiful way for you to uplift and bring things up into those higher realms. I do think that, comedians often don't necessarily get credit for being the magicians that they are when it comes to emotional alchemy. True. Right. And, we did talk about that. There's so many of them that you can think of, Robin Williams or Jim Carrey, who you see in comedians that they have experienced those lower vibrational emotions very deeply. And it is something of a skill to be able to transmute that into laughter and to find ways to make it something that you can laugh about and feel those joyful emotions about. So like maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe how, comedy has kind of, helped you in your emotional intelligence, or to be able to flip the script on those things that are difficult, right? Because that's the other thing, when you're saying like the affirmations and things like that, for me personally, those are things that haven't always necessarily worked for me, because that inner voice is like, that's a lie, right? You have that in there. But if you can maybe learn to speak to that inner voice as a comedian, and flip it on, even on that inner sort of turmoil, you can alchemize and transmute that energy for yourself into something that is, a bit more entertaining in this human experience.
Yes, thank you, Haleigh. Yeah, it's massive. I think some of the best comedians in the world have had some of the darkest moments. They have had depression, that darkness, and comedy has been, in a way, self-medication. Self-meditation is another good one. Self-meditation, self-medication. And I absolutely love humor, and I am constantly cracking jokes and, having fun, and, because joy and gratitude are at the 540 hertz. And, I love feeling that way. I want to feel more of that. I want to feel more joy in my life. I want to be happier. So if it's to be, it's up to me, right? If you want to have more joy and love in your life, then find ways to bring that into your life. And one of the best ways is to do what lights you up. Do what you love doing. Right now, I love what we're doing here. I'm in so much flow. I could chat with you for 10 hours. We're not going to do a 10-hour show here, but
not yet. One day. No. One day we will. We'll put it on the calendar sometime.
Marathon.
We'll do the Guinness World Record longest
podcast. Longest intelligence conversation ever.
Let's put. We'll go ahead and put that into the ether. We're gonna get me to Australia, and we're gonna get in a podcast studio, all of us together, and we're gonna do a marathon podcast. It's gonna be brilliant.
Aldwyn
Yeah.
just went out of the ballpark with that. Come back to us, Aldwyn. Come back, please.
Yeah. I think that'd be awesome. Well, see, talking of having fun, one of the things I love to do is take selfies, right? I love doing selfies and I love taking photos and capturing the moment. And I actually pitched to one of my mentors, Dale Beaumont, who runs Business Blueprint program in Sydney. He does these conferences with 400 or 500 people at the events. And one of the people that I met at the conference there, I used to, every time I'd see him, I'd take a selfie and I'd send it to him. We'd have these updates every few years of these selfies. And he said, "Oh, that's so good how you do that. Like it would really be great for you to get on stage on one of Dale's stages and actually share about how to do a great selfie or share something." And so anyway, we came up with this idea and we thought together, it was a guy called Kevin Bees. And the two of us came together and we said, why don't we pitch to Dale that we do a World Guinness record of the most number of selfies at an event? And we actually looked up online and we found that, okay, this is very doable. If we get everyone there taking selfies, the 300, 400 people at this event taking selfies all at the same time, then we can beat the Guinness World Records. And in the end, I think we had about 3,700 selfies within 3 minutes was what happened at this event. And so we actually got the world record of the most number of selfies at this event. And I tell you what, had so much fun. I was cacking myself the whole time, because what we did is we had a circle of people, and the people in the middle were taking the selfies, and the people on the outside were going, like, every few seconds, it was like 1, 2, 3, move, 1, 2, 3, move. And so every time there'd be selfie, next person, and it was the funniest thing. It was
Way. That's so
much
cool.
fun. This literally happened not too long ago. So
Thank you for sharing that here.
it was hilarious. It was absolutely
That's
hilarious.
great.
And now we're all record holders for the most number of selfies by a group in 3 minutes.
And what you also did was show that people can also be very organized when you're having fun. Like, organization and structure can also be fun. And look at you did. Like, you selfie, move, you selfie. Like, when you're doing something that is entertaining and engaging like that, people are ready to work together and to come together and be on the same frequency vibration
100%.
and be doing the same thing.
It goes back into our conversation earlier about supporting each other and being aware of that conscious field of when people are moving through different emotions, but it really just brings up the biggest thing, and it's my anchoring point of my entire human experience and what I'm here to teach, to remember with others continuously over and over and over, and that is free will. The greatest gift instilled, bestowed, and given, experienced by any fractal here and now is the ability to make a choice of your own free will to your desire, to your liking. And using free will to bring yourself from those lower hurts up to a higher is a powerful process. And when done over and over, you become a beacon. You become a presentation of what's possible. You set a new standard and you create a new pathway forward. And I believe that is what humanity is experiencing as we unbox this conversation, and millions of others do the same across this planet on this coherent frequency we find ourselves here on today, because this is what intelligence is about. This is what life and human emotion is about. The evolution of where we go, why we're there, and how we be while becoming. And we do this through free will, unconditionality, presence, love, and the spectrum of emotion. It's been freaking awesome unraveling all this. Is there anything else we want to cover in this final moments before we wrap up this powerful charge segment?
Yes, free will is so important. And also, never underestimate the ripple effect of, something. If you have a thought or a prompting, here we are from just some simple selfies to winning the Guinness World Record of, most number of selfies in a group environment in 3 minutes. I mean, it was a team effort too, right? There was Kevin Bees and myself got together. We pitched the idea to Dale. He loved the idea. And he took it on board and we ran it, and it was a beautiful team effort. So also, we're never alone. I think this is a big thing here with emotional intelligence too, because when we're feeling crap and we're feeling alone, that's when we will be the hardest on ourselves and the hardest on others. And hurt people, and healed people, heal people, or help to heal people. Now, we can never control what anyone else does. We can only control what we do in life. And always, I think it's so important with emotional intelligence. If you're coming from a loving, kind space, if you can, exercise today one random act of kindness, let someone in, for example, who wants to come into your lane if you're driving, or, smile at someone. These random acts of kindness can really shift someone's energy and help to shift someone's day, and then they might feel better, and then they'll go to their family and they'll just smile at their family members, or they'll just maybe cook something extra special for their family members, or whatever it is. Like, never underestimate the power of a simple kind gesture or loving thought, or for yourself or others. And this is how, if there's one thing in the world that you could change, as someone asked me this on a podcast the other day, if there's one thing in the world you could change, one thing that you would like to see, and one thing I would like to see, is world peace. And if we had world peace, if we had peace within ourselves, if we had peace for all other animals and all other beings on the planet, imagine what the world would be like if we had world peace. It'd probably just be like the Garden of Eden, right? It'd just be like we do have world peace amongst the chaos. And with the yin yang of life that we experience, there's always, I believe, going to be dark forces and going to be light forces. And I think the two balance each other out to some extent. And, I think it's also a matter of accepting what is, and accepting, what you can't change, and knowing what what you can change and what you can impact, and doing your best to have a positive influence on yourself and your own life, to live a full life, because a third of people die by 65, that we know, and 90% of people die with regrets. So if you don't want to be one of those people that are on your deathbed dying with regrets, or thinking about all the things you could have, should have, would have done that you haven't, then there's no time like now, like the present, to take some action, even the smallest action, inch by inch. Everything's a cinch. 50% of anything you do is just starting something. So if you have a thought or a prompting to make a change in your life, in the lives of others, then take action, and you will feel so much better for it, and you'll be impacting the world in ways that you may not be conscious of.
Wow. Empowering, grounded, and present. Really is the media queen, Aldwyn Altuney. She shows up, she changes lives, and she carries spirit in motion. I like the word regret. I like that being a closing out of this time with us today, because it really does fundamentally explain again the level of awareness and compassion that you have through endurance, resilience, and experience for the human emotion scale of consciousness. And it really shows how that one word can pull together everything in one moment. If you understand that word, this is my advice on the back of Aldwyn. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. Find acceptance in all moments, in all things. Be present. Make choices. Start small. Free will. It's yours forever. Start using it in ways that serve your highest joy. Bring yourself up the spectrum and join us at the next level of evolution. Aldwyn, it has been a true honor to be here with you. My co-host, Haleigh Overseth. We are profoundly in your essence, and it's been truly, truly something special. And I know that the guests that find this space in space and time are going to come with us on this next part of the journey. Truly an honor. Haleigh, would you like to say anything?
I do just want to say thank you again, Aldwyn, for joining us. We do so appreciate your energy. You are a bright, vibrant light, and I do love how much you do good things in the world. And we thank everyone for joining us on the About Intelligence podcast. You can find Aldwyn. She is on LinkedIn. You can find her Truth podcast. Give us your details on that. Run it down, because you've got that. That'll come off your lips faster than mine.
Yes. Please do connect. You'll find all my links at linktree/Aldwyn, which is linktr.ee/Aldwyn. I have some free resources on my media website. If you want to be seen, heard, and known, get out and make a bigger difference in the world, then let's connect. And also, we have the Global Good News Challenge every single month, free challenge that you can participate in and share gratitude and good news and help to decrease depression and suicide rates and lift the energy on the planet. And we have we're just about to release our first compilation book with Leanne Clune, which we've just produced, called Fear to Freedom: Conscious Creators Manifesting Magic. We are launching that on July 26th in Sydney. We have 11 co-authors from around Australia.
Wow.
And doing more of these Fear to Freedom series. And I want to remind people that the magic is in your hands. I've got my little magic wand here. Because you are in control of your destiny. You know, one of the shows I used to love as a kid, and I still love to this day, is I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched. Right? I used to love how I Dream of Jeannie, Elizabeth Montgomery, she would just twitch her little nose and
Yep.
it was possible. Right? Anything is possible. You know, anything is possible in your life. And whatever challenges you've had in your life, use those challenges as fuel to move you forward, because the challenges, I do believe, also are promptings from the universe on a path for you to travel. If I hadn't experienced the darkness and depression and anger and everything I'd experienced as a child, and if I wasn't so self-destructive and then decided that I don't want to live that way anymore, there's no way I would be the stand that I am now for good news, for gratitude, for joy, because I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to live 99% of my life in misery and depression. I want to choose to now live 99% of my life in love, peace, joy. I say 99% because there's going to be times we're going to go down the scale, right? We're going to have the challenges and the darkness, etc. And there's the biggest learnings right there. So enjoy the whole journey of life. Thank you so much for having me on About Intelligence. I've absolutely loved being with you today. Love your energy and keep up the amazing work.
It has been a true honor. Haleigh, thank you for being my co-host today again, Aldwyn, and thank you just one more time for choosing through awareness to enjoy the human experience at a level of conscious love. It is truly, truly special to be here with you. Until next time, enjoy and keep spreading that light.
Big love bubbles to everybody until next time.
Thank you. Much love.
Much love.
Shake the hand.
I love it. Beautiful. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.